Imagine waking up in a medieval village. The sun has barely risen. Smoke is coming from small houses. Farmers are already working. A baker is preparing bread, and somewhere nearby, someone is pouring a cup of ale. You might look around and wonder, why is everyone drinking? Was medieval Europe really a place where people drank alcohol from morning until night? Did they actually avoid water? And perhaps most interestingly, was alcohol really safer than water? The answer is much more complicated than the popular stories suggest. Because medieval people did drink plenty of ale, beer, wine, cider, and other fermented drinks. But they also drank water. And their reasons for drinking alcohol were not simply about avoiding dirty water. To understand why alcohol became such an important part of medieval life, we need to step inside the world they lived in. Today, if you are thirsty, you have an almost ridiculous number of choices: water, coffee, tea, juice, soda. Sports, drinks at milk. You can walk into a supermarket and find hundreds of different beverages. Medieval. People had nothing like this. There was no refrigerator waiting for you. No bottled water. No supermarket, and certainly no vending machine. Instead, people depended on whatever their local environment could provide. Fresh water might come from a well, spring, river, or other source. And when the water was clean, people absolutely could drink it. The old idea that medieval Europeans completely avoided water is misleading. Historical evidence shows that clean water was used and valued. The real problem was that not every water source was equally safe. In crowded towns, contamination could become a serious problem, and this is where other drinks became extremely useful. For many medieval Europeans, especially in northern parts of Europe, ale was an ordinary part of daily life. But medieval ale was not exactly the same thing as the strong beer many people drink today. Many varieties were relatively weak, and they could provide calories as well as liquid. For a farmer or laborer doing exhausting physical work, that mattered. Imagine spending an entire day working in a field. There are no machines doing the heavy work for you, no tractor, no engine, just your body, your tools, and the earth. A drink containing calories could provide some extra energy. So ale wasn't simply something people drank to get drunk. For many people, it was part of their everyday diet, and brewing itself could be a household activity. Here is where the story gets interesting. You've probably heard this before. Medieval people drank beer because the water was too dirty. It sounds logical, but historians have found that the reality was much more complicated. Medieval communities often built settlements near reliable water sources. People used wells, they used springs, they collected water, and regulations sometimes existed to protect water supplies from pollution. So saying that everyone avoided water would be a huge exaggeration. But there was still a reason people sometimes preferred fermented drinks. They were familiar. They were often flavorful. They could contain calories, and in some places and circumstances, people had legitimate concerns about particular water sources. So alcohol wasn't necessarily replacing water, it was simply one part of a much larger drinking culture. Now travel south. The landscape changes. The climate becomes more suitable for growing grapes, and wine becomes much more important. In medieval Europe, wine could be a symbol of wealth and status. The wealthy could afford better wine. They could serve it at feasts. They could use it to impress guests. A noble household hosting an important visitor wasn't going to serve everyone the same thing they served farm workers. Food and drink were part of social identity. What you ate, what you drank, and how you served it could communicate your position in society. Wine wasn't just a beverage, it could also be a statement. Now imagine walking into a medieval monastery. You might expect silence, prayer, books, and religious ceremonies. but monasteries could also be places where food and drink were produced. Some religious communities became known for brewing. Why? Because monasteries needed to support themselves. They grew crops, they produced food, they made drinks, and brewing could become an important part of their economy and daily routine. Monks also preserved knowledge through writing and record-keeping, so the story of medieval drinking isn't only about drunken peasants in crowded taverns, it also involves farms, monasteries, households, markets, and wealthy estates. Alcohol was woven into many different parts of medieval society. But if you really wanted to understand medieval drinking culture, you would need to visit a tavern. The tavern wasn't simply a place to get drunk. It could be a meeting place. People could eat there, talk, trade information, meet friends, discuss business, hear rumors, and sometimes simply escape from the routine of daily work. Imagine entering a crowded medieval tavern. The room is noisy. People are talking. Wooden cups sit on rough tables. Someone is laughing in the corner. A traveler is telling a story. A worker has just finished his day, and a merchant is negotiating with another customer. The drink is important, but the social experience is just as important. Absolutely not. This is another common misconception. Medieval societies had plenty of people who criticized excessive drinking. Religious writers warned against drunkenness. Moralists complained about people who drank too much, and laws sometimes attempted to control disorderly behavior. In other words, medieval people understood that drinking too much could cause problems. They weren't unaware of intoxication. They knew exactly what happened when someone had too much to drink, and they wrote about it. They joked about it. They complained about it, and sometimes they punished it. So the medieval world wasn't a permanent drunken party. So why did alcoholic drinks remain so popular? There wasn't one single answer. Different people had different reasons. For workers, some drinks provided calories. For communities, drinking was social. For wealthy families, wine could demonstrate status. For households, brewing could simply be part of producing food and drink. For travelers, inns and taverns provided places to rest and socialize, and in areas where certain drinks were widely produced, they became deeply connected to local culture. Alcohol was not just about intoxication, it was connected to work, food, religion, trade, status, celebration, and community. That's what makes medieval drinking culture so fascinating. So, did medieval people drink a lot? Yes, but were they constantly drunk? No. Did they drink alcohol instead of water because all water was poisonous? No. The truth is far more interesting. Medieval people were living in a world without modern sanitation, refrigeration, supermarkets, or bottled drinks. They made decisions based on what was available around them. They drank water when it was available and suitable. They drank ale. They drank wine. They drank cider and other fermented beverages, and they developed an entire culture around these drinks. The next time you see a medieval movie, and notice everyone holding a wooden cup, remember that you're looking at more than a stereotype. That cup represents something much bigger. It represents a world where food and drink were deeply connected to survival, work, social class, religion, and community. And perhaps the strangest part of all is that the medieval world wasn't nearly as simple as we imagine. They weren't simply people who drank because they had no clean water. They were people trying to make the best choices they could in a world very different from our own. And sometimes, those choices came in a wooden cup.